Welcome back to the Business Tech FinTech Conference, where we're speaking to the movers and shakers, the coders and founders, bankers and disruptors in the local FinTech space. And there's an interesting stat here. More than half of the world's population is now using the mobile internet, but sub-Saharan Africa is home to 47% of the world's uncovered population, an estimated 210 million people in 2020. That's according to the GSMA's State of Mobile Internet Connectivity Report. And it's a great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Bradwin Roper. He's CEO of FNB Connect. Bradwin, great to have you on the show. And obviously in the fintech industry, we always talk about future technologies and trends, but surely it's more important right now in South Africa, given that statistic, to talk about the present challenges like getting data and getting mobile devices into the hands of more people.
Yeah. I mean, you called it. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. You called it in that opening intro. You know, we see what we call the great digital divide happening in South Africa. And COVID put that into stark relief, right? So if you think about most of us attending this conference, you know, when we were thrust into hard lockdown, our kids could pivot quite easily between a physical classroom and a virtual classroom because, you know, we had devices and we had data and we had the ability to connect, right? So if you think about that basic human right around education, you know, the divide between the haves and the have-nots was put into stark relief during COVID. So, you know, the GSMA, which is, you know, the world body and the pinnacle of, you know, insights as it pertains to mobile connectivity, they talk to four key barriers, right? They talk about, you know, just network coverage. They talk about affordability. They talk about local content. And then they talk about, you know, just educating consumers. Now, we see in sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa that the biggest gap is that usage gap, right? So we've got great coverage. We've got 4G and 5G, if not 3G, you know, scattered across the country. But we see very low penetration, very low uptake on mobile connectivity. And the biggest barrier in South Africa is affordability.
Yeah, data costs. I mean, we've got to start bringing that down. And I guess also, you know, the way we connect becomes significantly important during periods of load shedding as well. But I don't want to dive too deeply into that right now. If you look at if you compare the GMSA Mobile Connectivity Index from 2014, so going back roughly 8 years to the current day, it shows that, you know, the rest of the world is increasing its levels of connectivity. South Africa continues to be slow on the uptake, though. What do you see as the main reasons behind that?
Yeah, so like I said, you know, affordability is the single biggest barrier. There's two components, right? So there's the cost of data, and everyone is really fixated on the cost of data. Fortunately, the GSMA and the World Bank have a global benchmark. So they advocate that the cost of a gig of data, mobile data, should be less than 2% of monthly GDP per capita. Now, prior to COVID, that number was in excess of that number. So we were sitting at about 3% of monthly GDP per capita. Fortunately, what we've seen is as data costs have fallen and as the GDP has been re-baselined, we see that, you know, South Africa now sits in that 1% mark. So we are making progress around the cost of mobile data. But if you think about high income countries, the GSMA speak to, you know, the Western world, the Americas and the Europe of this world being at 0.6% now. So while we have met that, you know, World Bank and United Nations and GSMA target as a nation, we're still lagging on a globally competitive stage relative to monthly GDP per capita, right? Because it is that relative cost that becomes really important for South Africans. So that's the one piece, is just the cost of data. And then the other one is devices. I mean, here's a scary stat. Believe it or not, we estimate that between 40 and 50% of South Africans today don't have access to smartphones. So feature phone prevalence is still quite ubiquitous. And again, that single biggest barrier is affordability. If you think about, you know, the cost of a device relative to monthly GDP per capita, that is exorbitant. And that continues to be a barrier in this great big digital divide that we see playing out in South Africa. So it's really cool that we're talking about, fintech and where the world can go. But unless we get more people connected, we're going to continue to exclude huge components of society.
Meanwhile, the same research that we've been talking about shows that around half of sub-Saharan Africa is within the footprint of mobile broadband, but isn't using it, to your earlier point. So really, we've got to make the democratization, the access to mobile devices, one of the driving points in the region, if we're going to see the benefits that it can bring.
Absolutely. The World Bank has done extensive research on this topic, believe it or not. And they show that if we can get 10% more South Africans connected, or across sub-Saharan Africa in any nation, bearing in mind that we've got between 40 and 50% of South Africans not connected to smartphones, if we can enable 10% more mobile internet connections, we have the ability to raise the GDP by 2.5%. So imagine, if for every 10%, that's an equivalent 2.5% lift on our GDP. But also, if you think about, labor absorptive components of the economy, the SME market, arguably, if you don't have a device and some form of connecting in this way, you're completely excluded from the economy. So it becomes real pivotal and real important as we venture into, the fourth industrial revolution, all of these like Internet of Things topics, to make sure that we don't exclude very critical components of our society from these economies.
And I think from a social perspective as well, delivering services, we see the rise of telemedicine and the like increasingly. I think access is going to become critical. Now, how is FNB Connect playing a part here and helping democratize mobile device and data for South Africans?
Well, geez, thanks very much. True to our purpose, we really want to just offer the best mechanism for our clients to be able to just stay connected. So just prior to lockdown, we slashed our 1 gig data price by 40% just before lockdown. And where we range now in that global mobile world conference and the World Bank metric is we are now at 0.8% of the cost of a gig of data relative to GDP per capita. So we're playing at the same level field as sort of westernized countries on that cost of data. So we can check that box. But equally so, in order to help the great digital divide, we've been able to combine the might of, that's in our MVNO business. We've also been able to combine the might of our credit scoring logic and couple that with our telco logic. So we're offering through extensive partnerships with Apple, Samsung, and Lenovo, some real groundbreaking prices on devices, right? So laptops, tablets, smartphones, not just phones, but all a range of accessories. And we're pricing it at the same price as that. From an entry-level perspective, we're talking 89 Rand per month. Most importantly as well, because unlike the incumbents, we have such credible and depth of knowledge on credit scoring that we can go far deeper into the economy, into the SME economy, into our entry banking clientele, into that section of the economy, those 40 to 50% of South Africans that were excluded, right? Because we just didn't have the IP in the telecommunications industry to be able to make sense of, whether that facet of the economy is creditworthy. So we've innovated in a massive way to try and also democratize the affordability of devices so that we can get more South Africans connected. The scary thing is by 2025, it's expected that, there will be 25 billion Internet of Things connections by 2025. We're sitting on about 10 billion today. 5G connections globally will move from, 1 billion connections today to 2 billion connections by 2025. That's around the corner. What we don't want to be as a country is be lagging against these mega trends and be completely excluded from this incredible section of the global economy that I think is going to unlock tons of potential across all facets of society, telemedicine, etc. So So we're just trying to continue to democratize around that affordability gap for both data and devices.
What are you seeing as you're trying to achieve this and roll it out as the biggest challenges when trying to democratize these technologies? And you mentioned education and educating people about the use cases, and how are you trying to navigate this space?
Affordability, the GSMA talks to affordability being one of the aspects, but education is another one. So educating ordinary citizens and SMEs on how to leverage these technologies. We are so comfortable with it because it's so ubiquitous and it's so part of our daily lives that for us to just get onto a Zoom call or do mobile banking or get onto apps to do certain things, it comes natural to us. But if you've never experienced it before, digital education is really important. And one of the mechanisms, again, that this research speaks to is making sure that that is localized to local markets, because, trying to communicate with people in a mechanism that isn't, too far from one's understanding, in a local content that is engaging, that is inviting. I think the next big steps then, once we've breached the affordability gaps, is around education, and then also making sure that there's enough local content. And how cool is it that, if you think about even on Netflix today, a lot of the trending stuff that we're seeing are local movies. So if we could take that sort of IP and democratize that into, just ordinary citizens around education, telemedicine, etc., how to connect the business. I think that presents an incredibly exciting opportunity for creatives as well to get involved in this economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone in financial media, we see a big opportunity in that as well to bridge that financial inclusion divide by providing education that's locally relevant and you can speak in the vernacular and to that audience.
Absolutely.
I thought Silverton Siege was a great movie. Right? Duke Wellington at heart hasn't stopped talking about it since it was released on Netflix, but it really is an exciting time. Speaking of some of those trends, what trends do you expect to see in the region moving forward in terms of things like data, devices, and user behavior?
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Things is here, right? The biggest trick that I guess Internet of Things and the metaverse has played on us is that actually it's arrived. And we're expecting for this big wallop of like the metaverse to suddenly happen, or for Internet of Things to suddenly happen. These things are alive and well today. We have connected watches and phones and tablets, and increased growth to 25 billion connections by 2025 is going to be an exciting journey to navigate. But also, here's a fascinating thing. I've had the privilege of visiting that Mercedes-Benz factory in East London, which is by far the crown jewel of Mercedes-Benz factories at a global level. And we have to remind ourselves, this as South Africans, is that, we have some real gems and some real fascinating capabilities. Here's an insight. 5G, the single biggest use case, according to multiple, and I'm triangulating across multiple pieces of research, the GSMA, McKinsey, etc. The biggest use case is actually in factories and in manufacturing. So if you walk into that Mercedes-Benz factory, you're seeing, hundreds of thousands of pieces of equipment being mechanized and moved, and it's highly efficient. Now imagine having that entire space kitted out with eSIM technology, where little pieces of technology can communicate with one another in real time. We often think about this being a consumer play, but there's a massive manufacturing play, and we've got a very vibrant manufacturing industry. And as we start seeing, these technologies that have played these massive tricks on us that have already arrived, the biggest uptake on that is actually going to be in that manufacturing space, which I think is an incredible trend that's going to be fascinating to observe.
And really exciting for our competitiveness when it comes to manufacturing. I mean, if you think of a
Absolutely.
connected device, predictive maintenance, it can tell you before it breaks down. You've got digital twins of mines that are happening. It really is a fascinating area. What role do you see the fintech community, companies, startups playing here in leading the democratization of data and mobile devices in the region?
I think one can't ignore the ethics of it all, right? And we've seen, sort of privacy laws, I mean, it's great to have privacy laws that we can abide by, but there's the letter and the spirit of the law, right? So there's this notion of the internet of behaviors that's quite a topical conversation right now as well, right? Where it's leveraging big data plus, pockets of internet of connected devices, etc. And there's this notion that we must try and monetize that as much as possible. Very quickly, I think this concept of pay for privacy, Web3 says that when I will control my data. So through a strong authenticated login, I will then determine how I want my data to be leveraged or not. But the ultimate winners are going to be, the ones that build on privacy, but also client experience. I mean, let's face it, we're all trying to solve for the same thing. We're all competing for the same share of wallet. We're all trying to be the biggest super app, etc. The winners, the real winners, are going to be the ones that are militant on privacy, but also really magical on client experience.
Absolutely. And our experience in the digital realm is always going to be judged against whoever is doing it best, because that is the benchmark. The barriers are always set there, and they seem to get higher and higher every year. So you've got to continually work to just stay in the race. Bradwin Roper, thank you so much, CEO of FNB Connect, talking about the importance of mobile device democratization in the region. Is very important that we do this. Imagine a 2.5% kick to GDP in South Africa over the next 2 or 3 years. Wouldn't that be fantastic?